Have you ever watched someone walk into a room and immediately known exactly who they were? You saw the way they held their shoulders, the timing of their laugh, the particular rhythm of how they spoke, and something inside you just knew. Not guessed. Knew. You could feel it in your chest, that tight, certain sensation that you had them figured out. Their insecurity was obvious. Their need for attention was transparent. Their arrogance was practically glowing. And you sat there, quietly superior, because unlike them, you could see clearly. You had intuition. You had perception. You were the one reading the room while everyone else was just performing in it. But here's what you never account for in that moment. That certainty you felt, that wasn't insight, that was recognition. You weren't seeing them. You were seeing yourself reflected in the parts of them that threatened you, and your mind, brilliant architect of self-protection that it is, immediately built a story that placed you above the threat. You called it judgment. It was actually defense. You called it intuition. It was actually projection, wearing a more intelligent mask. And the sharper your judgment felt, the more precise, the more instantaneous, the more certain, the more blind you actually were to what was really happening inside your own perception. Because real clarity doesn't feel like that. Real clarity feels uncertain. It feels slow. It feels like doubt. The kind of seeing that actually reveals something true about another person, usually arrives quietly, sometimes hours later, sometimes never fully at all. But the judgment that arrives instantly, that lands with the weight of absolute conviction, that makes you feel smarter and more perceptive than everyone else in the room, that's not your wisdom speaking. That's your unhealed wound finding a familiar shape in someone else's behavior and calling it understanding. Think about the last time you met someone new and immediately disliked them. Not because they wronged you, not because they said something cruel, just because of something off about them. The way they talked about their success, the way they interrupted, the way they seemed too eager, or too detached, or too something. You couldn't quite name it, but you felt it, that visceral recoil that your mind instantly translated into character assessment. They're performative, they're fake, they need validation. You found the perfect psychological label to justify the feeling, and then you stopped looking. You had your answer. You had categorized them, filed them away, and moved on with the quiet satisfaction of someone who sees what others miss. But what if that feeling wasn't about them at all? What if your immediate dislike was actually your nervous system recognizing a behavior that you, somewhere in your past, used as protection? What if the performative person reminded you of the version of yourself you worked hardest to outgrow? What if the fake person was exhibiting the exact social survival strategy you once relied on, and seeing it in them forced you to remember a version of yourself you'd rather forget? Your judgment wasn't insight. It was disgust directed outward because you couldn't tolerate feeling it inward anymore. You weren't reading them. You were reading your own history through their behavior, and because the story felt so familiar, you mistook it for truth about them. This is the mechanism that operates beneath nearly every snap judgment you make. Your mind is not a camera recording objective reality. Your mind is a projector, casting your internal landscape onto the external world, and the parts of that landscape that hurt the most, the insecurities you buried, the fears you never processed, the identities you constructed to survive, those are the parts that show up most vividly in your read of other people. You see their arrogance and feel certain because you know what hidden inadequacy smells like. You see their neediness and feel precise because you remember what it cost you to stop being that person. You see their anger and feel accurate because you swallowed your own so many times that you can recognize the taste in anyone's mouth. But recognition is not understanding. Familiarity is not accuracy. And the more your judgment feels like a mirror reflecting someone else's flaws, the more likely it is reflecting your own unacknowledged ones. Consider the person who constantly accuses others of being manipulative, not occasionally, not when there's clear evidence, but as a default lens through which they interpret every interaction. They enter every conversation armed, watching for the angle, waiting for the hidden agenda, reading subtext into every word. They pride themselves on not being fooled. They announce to anyone who will listen that they see through people, and they believe this makes them perceptive. But what it actually reveals is a psyche so shaped by betrayal or control that it can no longer imagine relating without defense. Their perception isn't clarity, it's trauma response dressed as wisdom. They've been hurt by hidden motives in the past, So now they see hidden motives everywhere. Not because they're more accurate, but because their nervous system is still living in the environment where that vigilance was necessary. They're not reading the present moment. They're reading the past, projected onto the present, and calling it intuition. Or take the person who immediately sizes up everyone's social status. Within minutes of meeting someone, they've calculated where this person fits in the hierarchy. They notice the watch, the confidence, the way others orbit them or don't. They feel a subtle satisfaction when they identify someone beneath them, and a subtle threat when they identify someone above. They call this social intelligence. They call it reading the room, but what they're actually doing is constantly calibrating their own position in an invisible ranking system that exists entirely inside their head. Their judgment of others is actually a continuous self-assessment, a compulsive checking of where they stand. They're not seeing people. They're seeing mirrors that reflect their own status anxiety back at them, and they interpret every reflection as data about the other person, rather than evidence of their own obsession with hierarchy. The text comes in from someone you haven't thought about in months. It's casual, just checking in, but you read it 3 times, analyzing the timing, the punctuation, the absence of emojis that used to be there. You construct an entire narrative about their emotional state, their motivations, what they really want from you. You're proud of how well you read between the lines. But between which lines? The lines they wrote, or the lines your anxiety drew? Because if you're honest, that analysis wasn't driven by curiosity about them. It was driven by your need to know where you stand. Your need to predict whether you're about to be hurt or valued. Your need to control an interaction before it unfolds. You weren't reading their message. You were reading your own fear of uncertainty, and you found exactly what you were looking for because you put it there before you even opened the text. This is the pattern that repeats across every domain of judgment. The parent who sees their child's independence as disrespect, not because the child is being disrespectful, but because the parent's identity is built around being needed, and independence threatens that identity. The friend who interprets your boundary setting as coldness, not because you're being cold, but because their friendship model depends on unlimited access, and your boundary reminds them of every time they felt abandoned. The colleague who reads your competence as arrogance, not because you're arrogant, but because your competence highlights their own insecurity about their abilities. In every case, the judgment feels true to the person making it. It feels obvious, undeniable, based on clear evidence. But the evidence was selected by a perception system designed to confirm what the person already needs to believe in order to maintain their internal stability. And here's the deeper trap. The more intelligent you are, the more sophisticated this mechanism becomes. Intelligence doesn't free you from projection, it weaponizes it. A less intelligent person might simply say, "I don't like them," and leave it at that. But an intelligent person builds an entire psychological framework to justify the dislike. They reference attachment theory. They cite behavioral patterns. They construct a narrative so coherent, so intellectually satisfying, that they never think to question whether the foundation is solid. They become so good at analyzing others that they forget to analyze their own analysis. Their intelligence becomes a shield against self-awareness, because why would someone this perceptive need to look inward? They've already looked outward with such precision. But precision in the wrong direction is just a more elegant form of blindness. You can be exquisitely accurate about other people's flaws, while being completely oblivious to how those flaws map onto your own unresolved material. In fact, the accuracy itself becomes part of the defense. If I can see this clearly in them, I must be objective, you tell yourself. But objectivity about others is not the same as self-awareness. You can be a brilliant observer of everyone except the observer. You can map everyone else's psychology while your own remains uncharted territory, protected by the very skill you've developed in charting others. Think about the last argument you had where you were absolutely certain you were right. Not just right, morally right, intellectually right, perceptually right, perceptually right. You had evidence, you had examples. You had a timeline of events that clearly supported your position, and maybe you were right about the facts. But were you right about the meaning? Were you right about the other person's internal experience? Or had you, in your certainty, collapsed their entire complex psychological reality into a simple narrative that made you the perceptive one and them the blind one? Because that's what certainty does. It flattens, it simplifies, It takes the infinite dimensionality of another person's inner world and presses it into a two-dimensional shape that serves your need to be the one who sees clearly. The person who actually sees clearly doesn't feel certain. They feel curious. They feel confused. They feel the discomfort of not knowing, and they stay in that discomfort instead of rushing to resolve it with judgment. Real perception is slow because reality is slow. It unfolds over time. It contradicts itself. It requires revision. But snap judgment is fast because it's not responding to reality. It's responding to your internal need for stability, for narrative coherence, for the emotional relief of having an answer. And your mind, which evolved to prioritize survival over accuracy, will choose the fast certainty every time unless you consciously intervene. This is why your sharpest judgments usually arrive in moments of emotional activation. You're not calmly observing someone and arriving at insight. You're triggered, and your triggered state is generating a story that explains the trigger in a way that protects your self-image. Someone ignores you as a party, and your mind instantly generates a character assessment. They're arrogant, they're shallow, they're intimidated by you. But what if they just didn't see you? What if they're socially anxious? What if they're having a terrible day and are barely holding themselves together? Your judgment arrived not from information, but from the sting of feeling unseen. And rather than sit with that sting, you transformed it into a story about their character. You felt better, but you didn't see more clearly. You saw less clearly because now you had a narrative that prevented you from seeing anything that didn't fit it. The scenario plays out in professional settings with devastating regularity. You watch a colleague get promoted and immediately your perception engine kicks in. You see the politics, the favoritism, the way they perform for leadership. You're not wrong, there probably are political elements, but your certainty that this explains the promotion, your dismissal of their actual competence, your need to frame it as unfairness rather than acknowledge that maybe they have strengths you don't. This isn't perception. This is the ego protecting itself from the threat of recognizing another person's value, because recognizing their value might require recognizing your own limitations. Your judgment of their undeservedness is actually your own anxiety about your worth, projected outward and dressed as observation. Or consider the person who constantly finds others toxic. Every few months, there's a new toxic person in their life. A toxic ex, a toxic friend, a toxic co-worker. They have an almost supernatural ability to identify toxicity in everyone around them, and they genuinely believe this makes them discerning, that they have standards, that they refuse to tolerate poor treatment. But if everyone around you is toxic, the common denominator isn't the world. It's your relationship to boundaries, to conflict, to your own role in dynamics. Your discernment might actually be a pattern of idealizing people initially, then devaluing them when they fail to be the perfect mirror you needed, then labeling the devaluation as recognizing toxicity to avoid the shame of having misjudged them or the work of having to examine why you keep choosing people who disappoint you. The judgment feels like self-respect. It's actually a defense against intimacy, against the risk of being known, against the possibility that you might be the one who is difficult to be in relationship with. The social media post gets 10 times the engagement you expected. You feel seen, validated, finally understood. But the one that gets ignored, the one you thought was your best work, your truest expression, sits there silent, and you feel a subtle resentment toward your audience. They don't get it, you think. They're not ready for this level of depth. But are they not ready? Or are you not ready to confront that what you thought was profound might actually be inaccessible, or that your sense of your own depth might be inflated by your need to feel special, or that the post that succeeded because it was genuinely resonant, or the one that failed because it was self-indulgent? Your judgment of their unreadiness is protection against the possibility that your self-assessment might be wrong. You rather believe in their blindness than question your own clarity. This mechanism operates so continuously that most people never notice it. They move through their days in a constant stream of judgment about the driver who cut them off, the friend who took too long to respond, the stranger whose outfit sends a message, the colleague whose tone revealed their true feelings, and each judgment feels like receiving data about the world. But it's not data about the world. It's data about your own psychological architecture, broadcast back to you through the stories you tell about other people. Your judgments are a continuous psychological assessment of yourself that you've mistaken for a continuous assessment of others, and the identity implications are profound. If you've built a sense of self around being perceptive, around being the one who gets it, around having superior intuition, then questioning your judgments doesn't just require intellectual humility, it requires identity revision. It means admitting that a central pillar of who you believe yourself to be might be constructed on a misperception. That's not uncomfortable. That's existentially threatening. So the mind protects the identity by protecting the judgments. It finds evidence to support them. It dismisses counter-evidence. It turns the very act of questioning into a threat that must be defended against. If I can't trust my read on people, what can I trust? But that's the wrong question. The right question is, if my read on people is actually a read on myself, what am I learning about who I am? The behavioral pattern becomes self-reinforcing. You judge someone, which creates distance, which prevents genuine intimacy, which means you never get disconfirming information about your judgment, which means your judgment remains unchallenged, which reinforces your belief in your perceptiveness, which makes you more confident in your next judgment. It's a closed loop, and the loop protects itself by ensuring you never get close enough to anyone to discover that your initial read was wrong. You stay safe, you stay superior, you stay alone, and you call it discernment. But what would it look like to actually break this pattern? Not by becoming naive, not by pretending everyone is wonderful, but by recognizing the difference between observation and projection. Observation collects data over time, holds multiple possibilities, revises with new information, and tolerates uncertainty. Projection arrives fully formed, feels certain, resists revision, and serves an emotional need. Real observation is boring, it's slow, it doesn't give you the hit of superiority that projection provides. It requires you to say, I don't know yet, when your whole nervous system wants to say, I knew it. And the internal contradiction is what makes this so difficult to see from the inside. The very mechanism that creates your blindness presents itself as your sight. Your projection wears the mask of your perception, and because the mask is so familiar, you never think to look behind it. You believe you're the exception, the one whose intuition is actually accurate, the one who really can read people, the one whose judgments are based on genuine insight rather than personal history. But that's what everyone believes. That's the universal feature of this mechanism, not the exception to it. The people who are most blind are the ones most convinced of their clarity, because their conviction is the blindness itself. Think about the times you've been wrong about someone, not slightly wrong, completely wrong. The person you thought was arrogant who turned out to be terrified, the person you thought was simple who turned out to be profound, the person you dismissed who turned out to be exactly what you needed. In retrospect, the evidence was always there. You just couldn't see it because your initial judgment created a filter that only let through what confirmed it. You weren't wrong because you lacked information. You were wrong because your judgment prevented you from receiving the information that would have corrected it. Your perception was active in creating your blindness. This is the awareness gap that keeps the mechanism hidden. You think you're observing reality when you're actually constructing it. You think you're receiving impressions when you're actually projecting meanings. And because the construction happens so fast, so automatically, so convincingly, you experience it as discovery rather than creation. You feel like you're finding truths about people when you're actually imposing your own psychological needs onto them and calling the result insight. The social dynamic this creates is subtle but pervasive. Groups form around shared projections. You bond with others over mutual judgments. Can you believe how they acted? Did you see what they did? And the shared judgment creates intimacy, but it's intimacy built on a false foundation. You're not connecting over genuine understanding of the person you're judging. You're connecting over shared, unhealed wounds that found the same target. The intimacy feels real because the emotion is real, but the content is projection, which means the connection is actually a mutual defense against self-awareness, dressed as friendship. And the validation dependency that underlies this is relentless. Every judgment that gets confirmed by others becomes evidence of your perceptiveness. Every "you're so right about them" becomes another brick in the identity you've built around being the one who sees. But validation of projection is not validation of truth. It's just multiple people sharing the same blind spot, and the social reinforcement makes the blind spot harder, not easier to see. You become trapped in an echo chamber of mutual projection, where everyone confirms everyone else's misperceptions, and no one ever asks the dangerous question, what if we're all just seeing ourselves in each other and calling it understanding? The delayed emotional reaction is often where the truth finally seeps through. You have the judgment in the moment, certain and sharp, but hours later, sometimes days later, something shifts. You remember a detail that doesn't fit your narrative. You feel a strange discomfort that you can't name. You find yourself wondering for just a second if you got it wrong, but by then, you've already acted on your judgment. You've already created distance, or sent the message, or told the story to 3 friends who confirmed your read. The doubt arrives too late, and the mind, brilliant at protecting coherence, dismisses it. I was just tired. I'm overthinking. My first instinct was right, and the loop closes again. But what if you started paying attention to those delayed reactions instead of dismissing them? What if you treated that subtle discomfort not as noise, but as signal? Not that your judgment was wrong necessarily, but that your judgment was incomplete, that there was more to see, that your initial certainty was covering something your mind didn't want you to notice. What if the moments when you feel most certain are actually the moments when you should be most suspicious of yourself? The identity instability that emerges when you seriously consider this is significant. If you're not the perceptive one, who are you? If your judgments are projections, what is actually true about your relationships? If you can't trust your read on people, how do you navigate the world? These questions are disorienting because they strike at the foundation of the self you've constructed, but they're also the doorway to something more stable than judgment-based identity. They're the doorway to genuine curiosity, to actual presence, to the kind of relating that doesn't require you to be the smartest person in the room, because it doesn't require you to be anything other than present. Because here's what replaces judgment when you stop projecting: attention. Not the performative attention of someone analyzing another person for flaws or insights, but the simple, open attention of someone who is actually there, receiving what is actually happening, without the urgent need to translate it into a story about character or motivation. This attention is quieter than judgment. It doesn't give you the same hit of certainty or superiority. It often leaves you more confused rather than less. But it's the only kind of attention that actually connects you to another person rather than to your own projection of them. The person who has done this work, who has genuinely examined their own projection patterns rather than just intellectually acknowledged them, moves through the world differently. They still have reactions. They still feel immediate likes and dislikes, but they hold these reactions lightly. They know that their first response is usually their history speaking, not their wisdom. They don't suppress the reaction, but they don't trust it either. They let it be there. They notice what it might be telling them about themselves, and they wait. They wait for the second response, the slower one, the one that comes from having sat with uncertainty long enough for something genuine to emerge. And they know that this second response might be completely different from the first, and they're willing to be wrong about their first impression in a way that the judgment-dependent person cannot afford to be. This is the behavioral shift that no one talks about when they discuss self-awareness. It's not about being nicer. It's not about giving people the benefit of the doubt in a naive way. It's about recognizing that your mind is constantly generating stories about other people that serve your psychological needs, and choosing not to act on those stories until you've tested them against reality over time. It's about developing the capacity to say, I don't know who this person is yet, and mean it, even when your mind is screaming that you do know, that it's obvious, that only a fool wouldn't see it. It's about trusting the slow over the fast, the uncertain over the certain, the curious over the convinced. The ego exposure in this process is intense. You have to admit, not just once but continuously, that your mind lies to you. Not maliciously, protectively, but lies nonetheless. You have to admit that what felt like your greatest strength, your ability to read people, might actually be your greatest blind spot, the mechanism by which you avoid genuine intimacy and self-knowledge. You have to sit with the possibility that you've been wrong about people you are certain about, that you've damaged relationships with your false confidence, that you've built an identity on a misperception. This is not comfortable work. This is the work of dismantling the self you've known in order to discover the self that is actually there, and the perception versus reality gap never fully closes. Even as you do this work, even as you become more aware of your projection patterns, you will still project. The mechanism is too fundamental to eliminate. But what changes is your relationship to it. You begin to catch it faster. You begin to hold your judgments more lightly. You begin to ask, in moments of sharp certainty, what if this is about me? Not as a rhetorical device, but as a genuine question. You begin to notice the emotional need that your judgment is serving, and you address that need directly, rather than using another person as an unconscious vehicle for its resolution. The social dynamics shift too. Your relationships become slower to form but deeper when they do, because you're no longer bonding over shared projections. Your conflicts become more productive because you're less certain that you're right, which means you're more able to hear the other person's actual experience rather than your interpretation of it. Your solitude becomes more comfortable because you're no longer filling it with mental narratives about the people around you. You're just there with them, in the uncertainty of not fully knowing them yet. And in that uncertainty, something genuine becomes possible. The internal contradiction that makes this sustainable is that you become more accurate about others precisely by becoming less certain about them. Your judgments, when they do arrive, are slower but more grounded. Your intuition, stripped of its projection component, becomes actually trustworthy in ways it never was before. But you pay for this accuracy with the loss of the quick certainty that once made you feel so perceptive. You trade the sharp, satisfying hit of judgment for the slower, quieter, more uncertain work of genuine seeing. And you discover that what you thought was clarity was actually just speed, and that real clarity moves at the pace of reality, not at the pace of your need to understand it. So the next time you feel that sharp certainty about someone, that immediate knowing, that precise read, that intuitive hit that makes you feel like you see what others missed, pause, not to suppress it, not to deny it, but to examine it. Ask yourself what need this judgment is serving. Ask yourself what it might be protecting you from knowing about yourself. Ask yourself if you're willing to be wrong about this person in order to possibly be right about something more important. Ask yourself if your clarity is actually blindness wearing a convincing mask. Because the sharpest judgments are usually the ones that cut you off from seeing. The most satisfying reads are usually the ones that prevent genuine understanding. And the intuition that arrives instantly, fully formed and emotionally charged is usually not intuition at all. It's the past, disguised as perception, demanding that the present conform to its shape. Real seeing is slower, it's less certain, it's less satisfying, but it's the only kind that actually sees anything other than yourself. And if you can sit with that, if you can tolerate the loss of your sharpest judgments, the ones that made you feel intelligent and perceptive and safe, what remains is something quieter, but more real. Not the you who reads everyone perfectly, the you who is finally present enough to actually see them at all.